Some people like to complain. They're always going on about how wrong everything is, and what other people did. And if there's any inconvenience that they experience in their life, there's always somebody to blame for it. There's always some excuse why it didn't go well. Jack Canfield calls people like this the Ain't It Awful Club. And I find that phrase really good. It's helped make things clear for me. Because we've all been in those situations. Maybe at work, we've been in a toxic work situation where everybody's always complaining about management, or they're complaining about their coworkers behind their backs. And I think it's important to realize the effect that this can have on us, on our own life and our own journey forward. Doug talks about how some people are anchors. They kind of hold us back or bring us down, whereas other people are motors. They inspire us, they encourage us. Around them, we do more. There's advice given to musicians. If you want to be a good musician, play with musicians who are better than you. And this applies to all sorts of parts of our lives, whether it's in success or working out or whatever we're doing. Surrounding ourselves with people who are moving forward, who are positive, as opposed to people who are in the Ain't It Awful Club, can really make it easier for us to do the same. But I want to make a distinction between, noticing things that are wrong and complaining. Because there's a lot of injustice in the world. There are real problems. There's corruption. But the difference between noticing and acknowledging that and dealing with that and complaining is one of agency. Complaining is a little bit tricky because complaining gives the illusion that you've done something when you haven't really done anything. So that coworker who complains to you about their lazy, person in their team, it feels like they've done something. They've let off some steam, but they haven't dealt with the problem directly. They've talked to you complaining instead of going to that person and addressing the problem directly. There's a sense about responsibility here in the agency. I want to give you one example of this. My partner worked at a store, and one day she just closed up for the day, so the doors were locked, and this woman came knocking on the door and was like, "Oh, you got to let me in. I've just driven for an hour from out of town to get here. You got to let me in." And the whole idea was not that this person should have, like, maybe before they drove for an hour, see how late the store was open. The idea was that my partner owed them something, that it was her fault for not keeping the store open, that it was her responsibility to, like, accommodate them. And that's the Ain't It Awful Club. Somebody else is always to blame, even when it's ourselves. And, successful people don't think like that. They don't act like that. We all have setbacks. We all have obstacles. It's how we deal with it. It's how we think of our own agency in that. That happened. What am I going to do about it? As opposed to that happened, and then get knocked off guard by it. We all have to watch it. I have to watch it myself. I can, hit obstacles and feel overwhelmed and discouraged. But, that's my responsibility. And the more I take responsibility for that, the more personal power I have, the more agency I have. And this can sometimes be subtle. A few years back, I was kind of involved in a group, and every time I'd show up, people were like that. They were complaining about politics or, stupid tourist drivers, whatever it was, the complaint of the day that everybody was rallying behind. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be part of that negativity. And so I'd kind of sit there quietly. But especially as I started doing more embodiment practices, I noticed the effect on me. I would kind of be curling in. My energy would be curling in, and I'd be in a protective stance, and I'd lose my own flow. I'd lose my own agency, my own ability to act and respond. So maybe if the conversation suddenly shifted, I'd be less available because I'd been pulling myself in. And once I saw that, I realized it was my responsibility to not be passive, because if I'm passive, I've let them win. I've let the Ain't It Awful Club, take over the whole meeting. And I realized I have to be a participant. And then I started doing things like, instead of being quiet, asking somebody about their family, what's happening with their kids, maybe asking somebody what movie they'd seen. Just try to shift it in a subtle way. Stay involved, stay part of it, keep myself in the game. And to give you another example of how sometimes we have to navigate this, a few years ago where I was living, I had a neighbor who every day he'd be sitting at the back of his truck drinking beer, and I'd have to walk by him to get down to the ocean. And every day he'd like try to snare me into a conversation about conspiracies or the government or what was wrong. And, at first I'd, be nice because I wanted to like get along with my neighbor and, be friendly. But it got to where I didn't want to, be a beautiful day. I'd want to go to the ocean, but I didn't want to walk by him because I'd have to deal with this, how to deal with it. One day I was walking by and he started going on about politics. And I just held up my hand and said, for myself, I'm really done with talking about politics. I just need a break from it. So I didn't put it on him. I didn't blame him for talking about it. I didn't judge him. I just said for myself, I'm not into talking about politics right now. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to the beach. And it can be helpful to have things like that because we don't want to be judging people or blaming people for where they're at, but we want to have a way that we can maintain our own boundaries so that we don't get caught in it and that we can maintain our own agency. So the first thing is just noticing. And like I said, I found that whole just learning that phrase, "Ain't it awful, club," helps me be more aware of it when I encounter it in people, but also in myself, because quitting the "Ain't it awful" club in ourselves is perhaps the most important part of it. So I notice if I'm watching news and I start getting like all worked up about some story that happened 1,000 miles away that I don't actually know the full details of, but I'm finding myself getting into like all these emotions of, injustice and anger, just letting that go about what can I be responsible for instead of just getting upset about something that it's not really part of my life. So I don't think that's selfish. I think it's just preserving you know, our own agency and moving forward. So nowadays, when I notice the Ain't It Awful Club, either in other people or myself, I just take a breath, recenter myself, and think about what I can do that allows me to stay present in a good way. So I hope this has given you a few things to think about, maybe helped you in a way. If it has, please hit like or subscribe. It helps this channel grow. And, you know, just keep moving along in a good way. And I hope that you can manage to extricate yourself from the Ain't It Awful Club. All right. Thank you.